Well, good morning. I don't know if you guys caught that, but the name of Matea's ministry is Something More, which I think is just really cool. It's like, hey, if you're searching for something, you feel like there's something missing, and you're just looking for something more, God's got it. I just think that's really cool, so I wanted to point that out. Hey, you ever feel like there's not enough time in the day to get done what needs to be done? Not enough days in the week to get done what you have to get done? Let me tell you about our family a little bit. I've got 4 kids, and they all have different activities, of course, right? Soccer season, half or most of soccer season just ended for us. I've got one more game to go for our U14 team, but I had 2 of the 4 kids in soccer, and oh man, that felt crazy busy just with 2 of them in it. Previous years, we've had 3 of them in it. So we were going to multiple games last Saturday, had birthday party stuff to get to this Saturday. Last weekend, there was housework to get done on top of like regular job stuff because the dryer went out. My youngest son, Linus, helped take it apart. He mostly had it apart before I got home. He helped take it apart, and then we figured out it was the motor itself that was bad, so ordered that, and that needed to be replaced. In the process of vacuuming out the dryer, cleaning it out, sucked up a quarter, it broke the vacuum. So ordered an impeller to do that, and so while one of the sons was fixing the dryer, another son was fixing the vacuum, and then there was this outlet that's kind of just been on the honey-do list, and mouse has chewed through, and we got to get that taken care of, replace the sheetrock and stuff, and another son did that. So luckily, many hands make light work, and they're just awesome helpers. But do you ever get that feeling, maybe even at your job, or in your family, or at your house, or with the relationships you have, that there are not enough days in the week to get done what needs to be done? Well, today we're going to talk about that day of the week where we're just maybe not supposed to do anything. It's kind of a weird thing that we're talking about today. It's called the Sabbath. It's one of the 10 Commandments. It's the 4th of the 10 Commandments. It's the only one that specifically includes like the death penalty immediately with it. We're going to talk a little bit about that. It's a little bit odd, but if you ever have this feeling of there's not enough days in the week, not enough time, I think that God has something for you this morning, and I want to offer that to you. So first off, addressing kind of just the definition. What is the Sabbath? It's not a regular word that we come across in our culture or anything like that. So when the Bible talks about the Sabbath, it's referring to in Exodus 20, where the 4th commandment says, "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but on the 7th day, that's a Saturday, is a Sabbath. The 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes your sons and daughters," thank you, boys, "your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you." All right, so we find out that observing the Sabbath, remembering the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath, has to do with not working, has to do with resting. It's a day of rest. Why? Why is that one of the 10 Commandments? Why is that something that God called the Israelites to do? This concept of the 7th day rest actually stems from all the way back in Genesis, right at the end of creation. God created the world in 6 days, and then on the 7th day, it says that God had finished his work of creation. So he rested from all his work. God doesn't get tired. Why did he rest? And God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. Now, God set some sort of pattern baked into creation itself of 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. I think that's interesting. There's a principle there that I want to make sure we catch this morning. This is something that's kind of baked into creation. And when it came to the Israelites, it became a command to observe the Sabbath, to remember the Sabbath. So what does remembering the Sabbath or observing the Sabbath actually look like? Later on in Exodus, Moses gets a little more details. In chapter 23, he says, "Plant and harvest your crops for 6 years, but let the land be renewed and lie uncultivated during the 7th year." So he's applying kind of really broadly beyond the week time frame to years time frame. "Then let the poor among you harvest whatever grows on its own and leave the rest for wild animals to eat. The same applies to your vineyards and olive groves. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but on the 7th day you must stop working. This gives your ox and your donkey a chance to rest. It also allows your slaves and the foreigners living among you to be refreshed." So we see that this applies not just to the Israelites, but To a certain extent, it affects the wild animals living near them. It affects their servants. It affects their household. It affects their employees. It affects even their livestock. And it allows them time to rest. And even back before the 10 Commandments were given, while the Israelites were traveling through the desert, God set up this first kind of command about observing the Sabbath. God gave them manna in the wilderness. I don't know if you remember that, where after they went through the Red Sea, they were complaining, hey, we're hungry, we need food. So God sent them manna, just this special food from heaven, this bread-like thing from heaven that every morning they would go out and collect. And they had enough for that day. And if they took too much for that day and kept it overnight, then it spoiled in the morning. Very strange. But God gave them a rule that on the sixth day, they were to gather twice as much so that on the Sabbath day, the seventh day of the week, they could have enough for that day and not have to go out and gather more. This was confusing to some of them. Some of them still went out on the seventh day, that first day, and was like, there's no manna on the ground. That's right, because you gathered enough yesterday for today, and God made sure it didn't go bad. And God says they must realize, in Exodus 16, they must realize that the Sabbath is the Lord's gift to you. This is why he gives you a 2-day supply of manna on the sixth day, so there will be enough for 2 days. You see, the Sabbath, this idea of a Sabbath rest, is a gift. The Sabbath is a gift, and God set it up for the Israelites, specifically showing how he can provide for their needs. God was saying, in essence, you can stop now. Okay, you've had 6 days, and you can stop now. For the seventh day, you can stop. And I'm going to take care of your daily needs. He didn't have to provide extra food on Friday, right? But he chose to. He did. And the Israelites showed their trust in God by collecting that extra on the sixth day, like he told them, and by resting on the Sabbath. It sounds awesome, sounds wonderful, sounds very peaceful, doesn't it? But let's talk a little bit more about the Sabbath, what it entails. In Exodus 31, there's this all kind of comes together. There's a lot of different verses in Exodus, but I just want to kind of show how it comes up in different places. In Exodus 31, it says, the Lord gave these instructions to Moses. Tell the people of Israel, be careful to keep my Sabbath day, for the Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between me and you from generation to generation. So remembering the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath, not working on the Sabbath was a way for the Israelites to show God and for God to see that they were aligning with his covenant with them, that they were keeping his commandments, that God had made this special deal with the Israelites, that they would be his people, that they would be set apart. And this was a sign. Keeping the Sabbath was a sign of that covenant. So what else? Exodus 35 says, and again, this comes up other places, anyone who works on that day, the Sabbath, must be put to death. Oh, okay. You must not even light a fire in any of your homes on the Sabbath. Now, hold on. This sounds serious. This sounds like it's pretty important. Why does not working on the Sabbath day, why is that so important that if you do work, demands execution? Not lighting a fire. But what if it's cold out? Surely there's an exception. If it's cold outside, I need to keep my family warm, I could light a fire then. Doesn't this feel odd? A lot of questions I'm sure the Israelites had about, hold on, what do you mean? no work, and then there's an execution if we break the Sabbath? Well, are you sure? Do you really mean it? In Numbers 15, it's a long story, but I'll summarize it. In Numbers 15, there's one of the Israelites. He goes out on the morning of the Sabbath, and he starts collecting wood. I'm assuming firewood. It doesn't specifically say, but how many of you here heat your homes with wood? They say it's that it heats you twice, right? Once when you're cutting it down, bringing it home, and then once when you actually use it. It's hard work collecting firewood, and so this guy was out collecting wood, and some of the people around him saw what he was doing, and brought him in and held him captive before Moses to say, "This guy was working on the Sabbath. What do we do about it? What do we do about it?" Because God's law says that they should be executed, but are you serious? And God replied, "You must be stoned." So put him to death. Take him outside the camp and stone him to death. So let me ask, how many of you worked yesterday? Maybe around your yard, maybe getting some firewood ready. Maybe you checked your emails. Maybe you, I don't know, fix something around the house. Maybe you actually work at your regular job on a Saturday. How many of you worked yesterday? What do you think? Doesn't that seem a little bit odd to us? It's a little bit foreign to us of that just working on a particular day stands out as, does this really demand execution? See, this guy, this Israelite guy, he thought he was calling God's bluff. But God wasn't bluffing because the Sabbath was serious. The Sabbath was very serious. And, throughout the Israelites' history, of course, they struggled with keeping all the laws and stuff. This Sabbath one is one that came up over and over. If you look through their history, there was at one point where Israel actually had been split into two kingdoms, and it was actually the kingdom of Judah that got exiled to Babylon. One of the reasons God gives for them being exiled is because they did not give the land Sabbath rest. And so for the 490 years, approximately, of them not giving the land Sabbath rest, that seventh year each year, God counted and said, okay, so you're going to be in exile for 70 years. That's how critical that was. So when the Jews came back to the promised land, they were like, okay, we're going to set some ground rules, and we're going to make sure we cannot even come close to breaking the Sabbath. And so they set up categories of 39 different types of work, all tied back to actually what it took to build the tabernacle, the movable temple that they had when they were out in the desert. Things like not weaving, because they made tapestries for the tabernacle. Things like not harvesting grain, because that's one of the things that they would do for making special stuff for the temple and the sacrifices and things like that. Not butchering, etc. Not lighting a fire, right? That's specifically called out. And in those 39 categories of work, they came up with hundreds of subcategories. Hundreds of subcategories. How many of you have a fridge that has a Sabbath mode? We do. And I was like, I read the manuals. I'm one of those weirdos. And I was reading it going, Sabbath mode. What does that mean? Does that mean it it cooks the food for me, spits it out? Because that would be pretty cool. Okay, so Sabbath mode, I found out, is where it's set up that if you have it set up in Sabbath mode, whatever, when you open the door, the light doesn't turn on. Why is that important? It goes back to lighting a fire. They've interpreted it now so that turning on a light is similar to lighting a fire. Therefore, if you turn a light on, you are working and you're breaking the Sabbath. That's why my refrigerator has a Sabbath mode. Isn't that interesting? It was mind-blowing to me. But those are the sorts of rules and details that the Jews now had to contend with of following the Sabbath. Can you imagine hundreds of subcategories of you cannot work? Stepping on glass all the time. When Jesus came, he had issues with their rules. In fact, he kind of made a habit of crossing the lines that the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, the rabbis had put in place regarding the Sabbath specifically. One time his disciples were walking through a field on the Sabbath day. And while they were walking through, they were just grabbing heads of grain, just winnowing them, getting the grain out so that they could eat while they're going. That's work, man. That's harvesting, that's winnowing, threshing, right? And so the Jewish leaders who saw that came up to Jesus and said, they challenged him, said, you cannot allow your disciples to do this. They are working on the Sabbath day, they're breaking the Sabbath. Jesus shared a story about King David before he was king, being with his merry men and them being hungry and actually going in. They were kind of merry men. Going in and eating sacred bread that was on the altar that was only supposed to be eaten by the priest, but his men ate it and God was good with that. Jesus shared that story, and it's hard trying to figure out where's this line drawn. And then Jesus said, then he told them, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. AKA all these rules and sub-rules somehow miss the point. If I had been there and I had been raised in the Jewish customs and everything, and I had watched Jesus allowing his disciples to pick heads of grain, I think I would have been confused. I think I would have been one of those people wondering, hey, you're breaking the Sabbath. What's going on here? But Jesus is Lord even of the Sabbath. So he knows what's right, and he can do whatever he wants to do with the Sabbath, right? The Jewish leaders, beyond that, after that, it's Mark 2, where that comes in. But after that, the Jewish leaders made a habit of watching Jesus on the Sabbath, specifically to see, are you going to do some work so that we can get you executed, because you're breaking the Sabbath rules. In essence, they thought Jesus was bluffing when he said he was Lord of the Sabbath, but Jesus wasn't bluffing. You see, Jesus, because he was who he said he was, because he was able to do what he said he would do, to fulfill the law, to be the perfect sacrifice, to die, be buried, and then be raised on the third day. A guy who can predict that and then pull it off, I'm going to believe anything he says. And Jesus said he was Lord of the Sabbath. See, Jesus wasn't bluffing. In addressing, and so Jesus fulfilled the law. And so for us, we're left kind of wondering, okay, how does this whole law thing, how does the Sabbath thing apply to me as a follower of Jesus? If you're a follower of Jesus, how does it apply to you on a weekly basis, on a yearly basis, maybe on a daily basis? What does this look like? Well, Paul has some words about this, and I want to be balanced here, but there's several different passages I want to look at. One is in Colossians chapter 2, where it says, Paul writing says, don't let anyone condemn you for what you eat or drink, or for not celebrating certain holy days, or new moon ceremonies, or Sabbaths. For these rules are only a shadow of the reality yet to come, the reality in the future, and Christ himself is that reality. Don't let anyone judge you for not keeping the Sabbath. Anybody happy about that? I'm happy about that. Don't let anyone judge you for not keeping the Sabbath, or all these other laws and customs and everything that the Jews had put in place. Don't let anyone judge you for that. For these rules are only a shadow of what is yet to come. Shadow of something in the future, and Christ is the reality of that truth. How is Christ the reality of the Sabbath rest? What does that look like? This is where I think it gets really cool. We actually see a glimpse of this back in Exodus as it's pointing forward to Christ. Looking back at the Israelites coming out of Egypt, but also looking forward to Christ. In Exodus 31, the Sabbath is given so you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. Who makes you holy. You see, this is where it hits home. The Israelites had been pulled out of Egypt, not by their own power, not because they were powerful, not because they had all the weapons, not because they convinced Pharaoh with their awesome words, but because of God's power. Only through the power of God, working through the plagues he sent on Egypt and convincing Pharaoh and pulling them out. Their works could not set them free. God set them free. God pulled them out, and God set them apart, also known as made them holy. God made them holy. In the same way, our works cannot set us free from sin. Our obedience to a certain set of rules or list of deeds and duties cannot make us right with God. Cannot ever make us right with God. Jesus makes us right with God. Jesus cleanses us from our sins. We can rest from our works and put our hope in Jesus alone because God already worked. That's where the Sabbath comes in for us. We can know that our works can be done, and we can rest in confidence because the Sabbath reminds us to stop. The Sabbath reminds us to stop our works, trying to justify ourselves before God, because it's useless. It doesn't do anything. When we try and do our works to justify ourselves before God, God looks at those and says, yuck, gross, filthy rags. Jesus has already taken care of it. That's where we stand in the Sabbath. So we can remember what God has done through the Sabbath, through a Sabbath rest. And I got to say, I've struggled with this part of the message so much. I've been back and forth in my head how much needs to be said and how much doesn't. But I think this needs to be said. I have seen so much false teaching on the Sabbath today out there, modern stuff, whether it's from Christians who are wanting to do the right thing and their heads are in the wrong place, or whether it's from cults that are proposing you can get right with God by following these works, by doing these things. There's so much false teaching out there that I really want to share this as Paul is writing to the Galatians. This is what I'm feeling. So now that you know God, or should I say now that God knows you, why do you want to go back and become slaves once more to the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world? You are trying to earn favor with God by observing certain days or months or seasons or years. Perhaps, I fear for you, perhaps all my hard work with you was for nothing. We can't satisfy God with what we do. We cannot gain favor with God by what we do. And yet, so take that as the warning. As you remember the Sabbath rest, as you use that maybe to remind you of God's work in your life, don't let it become a legalistic thing that you think, I'm finding favor with God because of this, that this is making me right with God. Don't. And yet, at the same time, I've got to balance this out. Romans chapter 14 says, in the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convicted that whichever day you choose is acceptable. So we've got freedom here. We have freedom here to observe, remember, practice a Sabbath day of rest, kind of exactly as the Israelites would have, on a Saturday, on the historical Sabbath, on the creational Sabbath. Or we have freedom to do it on a Wednesday. Or, hear me out here, why should we as Christians reduce the day of remembering what God has done to us down to a single day? Maybe. I'm throwing it out there because this is an area where we have liberty, we have freedom. And wherever you're convinced or convicted, wherever God puts that in your heart of this is how I want to remember the Sabbath day and observe Sabbath rest that God has offered as a gift. This is what it's going to look like in my life. So do that. There's maybe some ways you can look at that. How do we own this? If you journal, some of you journal, some of you have got some journals from here, which is cool. Journaling can be a way of meditating and practicing what God is putting on your heart or realizing what God has put on your heart. But if you journal, take one day this week and ask the question, do I trust God to provide for my daily needs? Like the Israelites in the wilderness with the manna. Do I trust God to take care of my daily needs? This is echoed by Jesus in Matthew 6 when he says, don't worry about tomorrow, what the day may bring. Don't worry what you're going to eat. Don't worry what you're going to wear. Because look at the birds of the air. They don't collect food and store it away in barns Look at the lilies of the field. They don't weave themselves fancy clothes, but those birds are taken care of. God takes care of the birds, and those lilies are clothed better than even King Solomon ever was. So maybe think through, do I trust God for my daily needs physically? Do I trust God for my daily needs spiritually? Think through that, journal about that. And is there any part of you that's really questioning, hey, does God actually have it taken care of? Do I trust that I'm right with God because of the work of Jesus? So journal through that. And then maybe something really active to do is give rest to your household. Sorry, boys. Give rest to your household. And maybe you can broaden that, and if you're an employer, giving rest to your employees. Maybe it means not calling someone when it's after hours. Maybe it means not calling them when they're on vacation. Maybe it means being overly generous with vacation time in general. I don't know. You're going to have to be convicted of this. At home, maybe it does mean leading your family in a time of rest, whether it's a full day, maybe it's a partial day. Maybe as a Christian, we shouldn't restrict it to one day. Maybe it means leading them in a time of rest daily. What does that look like for you? And how can you provide rest for those in your sphere of influence in the same way that God called the Israelites to allow it to touch even the wild animals in their sphere of influence? I'll leave you with this. The Israelite priests, when it came to the Sabbath day and everybody else was done working for the week, the Israelite priests actually had extra sacrifices to make. They had to make twice as many sacrifices as they did on any other day of the week. So, in one sense, the Israelites were resting from their works, their physical works, though. In the other sense, they were working twice as hard to try and make themselves right with God. We don't have to do that. And there is a rest in the future ready for us. The writer of Hebrews says there is a special rest, a Sabbath rest, still waiting for the people of God. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating this world. We can rest from our works. You can stop. You can stop now. Because we have a rest that is both currently true, we're resting in Jesus now, but is also a hope for the future. We have that future rest in Jesus, with Jesus, to look forward to. So let's make every effort to enter that rest. Would you pray with me?